Okay, welcome to CBOR Interim. This is an IETF meeting. The note well applies. If you have any question, please contact your chair, me or Jim. Okay, today we have, sorry for the lateness of the agenda, but it came kind of at the last second. So I posted the link. Let me repost the link to the minutes. On the agenda today, we have several items. Oh, I see that, Jim, I guess you have added this item, which is a status of the CBOR BIS document from Barry, but I don't see Barry in the meeting. So I don't know, I guess, yeah, I don't think anybody has update on that.
Yeah, that's fine. If he was here, it'd be nice to know when he's finally get to it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I guess we'll try to contact him and see how this is moving. Then CBOR tag for date status. Mike, he's not here yet. I think he replied that he would be joining, so maybe let's move that for later. Then we have a discussion. I don't know what order we want to take this on. Carsten has submitted a new OID draft. And then the discussion that Jim has started on CDDL module design. And I want to take 10 minutes at the end to talk about IETF 108 and make sure that the scheduling works and maybe talk about the agenda items a little bit. So
yeah, let's talk about OID first, because I think that will be quick.
Okay, go ahead, Carsten.
This draft has been stuck for almost, or even more than 3 years now, because my esteemed co-author put a lot of stuff in there that was very innovative and novel and all that, but maybe was going beyond what we typically do in a tag document. And ASO and object identifiers are kind of very basic, so maybe we shouldn't try to attach too much stuff to them. So I took the document from 3 years ago and refocused it to doing exactly that, defining a couple of tags for ASN1 object identifiers. And I removed all the other things that are also interesting, but maybe should go into different documents. With those tags, I kept one interesting feature, which is tag factoring. So you can put an OID tag on an array or a map, and then the OID tag applies to all elements of the array or to all the keys of the map. I think that may be a useful abbreviation, but I removed all the more complicated forms of using tags, tag stacks, and all that. And I think we need to be a little bit critical whether I didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater there. But I think that what's currently in the draft is a pretty good set of functionality that will solve 99% of the problems.
On the keys or on the values for map?
On the keys, yeah, that's a good question, but really the keys. So the assumption is that we have things like X520 names and stuff, and just can avoid putting a tag on every key in there by putting the key on the tag on the map.
Okay, I haven't had time to read it yet, but this is an action point for the working group to take a look at the document.
Yes. So I wanted to have on the agenda today to verify that the general direction is not going counter to what the working group wants. And I will submit a -07 later, so we have a proper draft to actually look at as a working group.
So, Karsten, just I guess I read this once a while ago, but I just looked at it again. So just to confirm for me, you created a tag which lets us put an OID in ASN1 format in, not a way to encode an OID as an array of CBOR integers, right?
Right.
Okay.
And when you say AS1 format, you mean basic encoding rules format?
Yes, I mean that. Sorry, excuse me to be imprecise. Yeah.
Yeah, I also put in a little twist to the relative OID thing. There are these RFC 6256 SDNVs, and these are identical in structure and semantics to relative OIDs. So I thought we could just reuse the tag for that one as well. So I expect to get some feedback back on that. So that saves us having to do a separate tag for SDNVs. I think it's 6256.
Okay. Thank you, Karsten.
So I take it that I will do the -07, submit that today, and then we do the usual thing, look at this, and
Yes.
maybe look at this with a view to actually adopting it soon.
Yes. Have you had any contact with Sean?
No.
Okay. Just to know. Okay. Yes, I think it sounds good, and so we can move to the next item. So Mike has joined. I don't know if you want to take that before the CDDL discussion.
It's less likely to take a lot of time. Let's do it that way.
Yeah.
I wake up this morning and I see there's been a bunch of discussion about time zones. I'll back up and say I drafted to address the working call comments that came in. One of which was a wording suggestion by Jim that I adopted. Most of the others were saying, be clear that there's no time zone. So I now say that there's no time zone and that 8 seconds don't apply. And I see that Kirsten responded to Jürgen about Angela Merkel's date, which I thought was a good. I haven't read through the rest of it because I'm just scared. But something in the discussion that went after, I think we're ready to send this to the. There's something hidden in the discussion.
Yeah, I think that the main requirement here is that we explicitly identify this as calendar dates, as opposed to 24-hour periods that are anchored on a time scale. And I think that that's all that needs to be done. So one or two sentences should fix that.
I sent a slight update on what I'd like to see in the security sections. I wasn't overly happy with the particular text you had.
Okay. I see that there's email from you in my inbox. So why don't I read those while we just and then let's come back to this topic in a few minutes after I've read the thread. That works.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, let me read what came in last night.
Great. So in the meantime, we can to the CDDL module design discussion. I posted the first mail in the mail archive for this thread. So Jim, do you want to maybe summarize what this was?
Basically, modules is one of those things that everybody wanted. So I started by trying to figure out some of the questions I think that need to be answered and sending them out for discussion.
Anything that we want to focus on now? Or should we go through all of them and summarize what our opinions are?
I think that the first thing that should be discussed is the question of global namespace versus not global namespace.
What does not global namespace mean?
ASN.1 doesn't have a global namespace.
Well, actually, it does. It's called OID.
And the only thing it is used for is to identify a module.
Yes.
So any symbol which is defined inside of a module has to be explicitly imported from an external module.
Yes, I would expect that's what we are going to do as well.
Okay, that was not at all clear to me from what you were saying. Since you were talking,
we still need a global namespace so we can identify modules. But I wouldn't expect that the symbols that are used in a specific CDDL specification are coupled very tightly to the global namespace. So this is what the module feature should actually do for us. Managing those namespaces and making sure a specification can use names defined in other specifications without having to provide the full name on every use. And that's why my text had a distinction between symbols, which are the names that we're using within a CDDL spec, and various kinds of global or external names or references. There is also a difference between names and references. So a reference can be something that still needs to be resolved until you actually have the global thing. Yeah, so
I did not read that from your piece of mail.
Okay, we need to define that terminology. So if you look at SDF, we have a global namespace in there too, but you essentially use the query construct in SDF to reach into that global namespace, which is one way of doing that. This is not necessarily the one I would suggest for CDDL, but there needs to be a link between the global names and the names that are actually used in a specification.
I've thought that with SDF, you could have two different modules that actually define the same internal name.
Yes, and I would
and with the same namespace.
For CDDL.
With the same namespace.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would be very useful. but there's no way to actually stop people from defining names. I mean, we don't have an armed guard sitting behind every person, so people will define names. And the obvious problem here is that we not only have different people writing different modules, we also have the same module going through revisions. So we will have several definitions of the same name in some way, and we will need to be able to disambiguate which one we actually mean.
In SDF, is the module itself named?
Yes, but that's not relevant. So the module doesn't really have a name, but it has a default namespace, which looks like a URI, into which the module actually exports names. So it's a little bit like a namespace declaration in C++. You just say, where do the things that are exported here go?
Could you make an example, Carsten?
Really like a namespace declaration in either ASN.1 or Python maybe.
Yeah, I must admit I'm rusty in both, so I'm not entirely sure what properties they have.
Well, ASN.1, every module is named with a unique name. If you
Yes.
revise, if you do a revision of a module, it gets a new name, which is painful.
Yes, I think the Yang people are trying to do something similar, except they also have embraced semantic versioning. So the version is part of a name, and they also have dates on these things and so on. And I need to understand how exactly all these parts play together in Yang. But Yang is definitely something we should be looking at, because they have just gone through the process of fixing up their naming, versioning, and publication process and all this stuff. So we
You're
probably
gonna make
can
me learn
learn
Yang.
something.
You're gonna make me learn Yang.
No, I just say we should look at the way they do their module naming and so on.
Yeah, it's not super elegant, I think, but it's okay.
Essentially every Yang module has a sed script that edits it so that it can have the right module names inside of it while you're developing it. It's a bit annoying. I would rather not have to do that. And at least Pyang itself doesn't exactly always know how to pull in you can't specify the module, the most recent version of this module, as far as I've ever been able to see. So you sometimes wind up building some tooling around the tooling so that you can get the right thing with the right name. And it just be nice not to do that.
There is an interesting spectrum here. So you can build your system in such a way that it is completely deterministic, in which case the best module name is a cryptographic hash over the module's content. That works very well. But it also is very hard to work with. So in operating systems, we have package managers that actually do the work for us before we can use naming schemes like that. And that's probably the kind of software that you have been talking about now. And the other end of the spectrum is to have a reference system. So we have an expression that says, give me the newest foo. And then we have a resolution process that actually resolves that reference into a specific module.
Gem
And
files and Python requirements do
yeah,
that really well, and I think they do it sufficiently well for our purposes. So that might be worth
yeah.
stealing.
So
And we have running code.
I would expect that we can do something like such a reference system. We still should think about this a lot, because it's easy to fall into the trap of applying your experience from managing pieces of software to managing specifications, and that is different, and not all intuitions actually apply. So Python has this great feature called from future import, which nicely demonstrates that versioning is sometimes weird.
Well, okay, so as a comment, just last comment probably, we are not talking about files here. I think specifications is a good thing. And I think Yang people think about as files mostly. So there is this date tag added to them. Sorry about calling it a date tag, but actually it is. So, and that is to disambiguate revisions. But that's it. It is not used in Yang itself anymore. It's only used in the specification of the module, or in the specification text around the module, effectively. Then we need something that is not only for files. That is, I think, very important. And we talk about software here as a counterexample, and these typically also are somehow tangible, more tangible. CDDA specs probably are not always that. So that is, I think, very important, especially inside the CDDL notation.
Hank, I don't understand why you think that CDL specifications don't more or less directly map to files. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, but that's just what in the early days when creating CDDL, there's an order to the rules. At the start, I always thought about we concatenate two files, and of course the order is clear. But if there are just uploaded blobs of data that reside in memory and never are a file, they still have to be ordered correctly. But now you don't have a file system; you only have two specifications, and they have to kind of be self-descriptive in their own way. And that is the reason why we think this the root rule has to be at the very beginning. If two root rules the two specifications that are relying on each other, and you concatenate them, and now you have no file in there, so no namespace problem, because they know each other, so to speak, or they're built with awareness of each other. But they still have to be in the correct order, and that is, I think, something that is also to the module design here. But maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
I
Oh,
think
no, that's definitely true.
The shortcut of using the first rule to say this is what this specification ultimately defines, that worked reasonably well for the first 5 years. But I think with a module system, we really don't need this any longer. So I think that we will have ways for a specification to be explicit about what data types it actually exports, and we have a number of specifications that export more than one data type, which happened first in RFC and COSI, which has this weird rule at the top, which says COSI has the following 5 relevant exported data types.
Yeah, not my fault.
Definitely my fault. Yeah, we want to go beyond that, and then maybe the question of order gets a little bit less important. I sent a message to the mailing list a couple of minutes ago that goes into this in a little bit more detail. So we cannot completely ignore order, but this kind of problem that we are having, where we are building our specifications out of files and have to be careful putting them into the right order, I'm not sure that we will have that once we have a module system.
Yeah, so mitigating that via module system, I think, is exactly the point. Yes. But still, it has to take on that requirement and therefore make it work.
Yeah. So in the end, we are not going to tell our tool validate this instance against that specification, but validate this instance against the exported type foo out of that specification.
Yeah, and also understand probably that there might be dependencies here that you need imports
Yes.
on the other end. Yeah, exactly.
So I think explicit export and import interfaces are really the
Yes.
important part.
Exactly.
And maybe the way these interfaces interact with the global namespaces is something we can import from SDF, or at least can steal some ideas from SDF. We don't have to structure it exactly like that. But I think the important thing about the way SDF uses these namespaces is it uses URIs, but these URIs are not meant to be dereferenced. So you cannot expect to find something at a specific URI that is either useful at all or complete or up to date. So I think we are digging ourselves into a big hole if we build this around URIs that actually are meant to be dereferenced.
In SDF, the URIs that are used are in the URL namespace.
Yes. So they are usually HTTPS URIs, but at the same time, they are not intended to be dereferenced. So
which is becoming a very common trope.
Yes, it's like the way that URIs are used in RDF and other places.
This is bike shedding, but I don't like the word export the way you defined it. But we can argue about that later.
Yeah, I already agreed to you in one of my messages. So I know what you mean, and the word export is really a technical term that really should be called contribute. So a specification contributes to the global namespace, and it does this in such a way that you don't run into random concrete walls that people have erected in good intention, but not knowing that the world was going to rotate under them. So what's the inverse to contribute?
Dialing.
Steal?
Load?
Nah.
Politician?
That was near the bone.
So I, in my human readable annotations that I, not to get confused myself, I put into CDS specification nowadays is actually literally depends. So I depend on the contribution of some other thing, otherwise I will not function properly. It will function though, mostly. That is a little bit weird. So it's not really a dependency. Dependencies, I think, are things that do not run or do not work at all without something that's contributed. But a contribution is basically, maybe it's more like an augment. I don't know, we can call it augment, but it's more like an overview. So you only add things. It has to be self-sufficient in the first place. Otherwise, it will not be a valuable module. If it's importing, sorry, it's depending. But it is actual dependency.
So it's a little bit like the socket concept in CDDL, where you have something that anyone can contribute to.
Yes.
The specification doesn't really tell you which of these contributions are good or bad, or should be used or should not be used. That's something that needs to be done separate from the specification.
Yeah, and then I have to also contradict myself right now again, because I see the specifications parts that are right are of course not self sufficient sometimes. Sometimes they are only purely contributing CDL specifications. They are not a full spec by their own right, and I highlight that. So these are not root CDDLs, I call them mostly. So as a specific kind of dependency to that, they need something to contribute to. Otherwise, they do not really work.
Yeah, let's call those rootless specifications.
Yeah.
So if you look at the prelude essentially is the first big rootless specification we did.
Exactly. That is a very good example. That's always there, and it's used by everything. It's a little bit of a hybrid, therefore. But yes, same thing like that. If you have a second level prelude build that can be consumed by other, it contributes to everything else in the build. That should be a viable module.
Yeah, so people should be able to pick up those additional preludes, and usually when we do a tag definition, then we put a couple of lines of CDDL into that tag definition, and that's really something that should be selectable. So you can say, here's the CDDL for the tag definition, and I can just import that without a lot of ceremony.
It also allows us potentially to better select between the JSON prelude and the CBOR prelude.
Yeah, you know, you are more constrained if you're constrained if you do going with the JSON prelude. Simply some types are not allowed in there, so you cannot just use a contribution that is a JSON prelude or something built on that and then plug it into otherwise the CBOR prelude and plug it into a CDL spec that is for JSON. It simply does not work.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about how composition works with these switches, and how do you actually use a module that has a switch from another module that also has a switch, and make sure the switches are thrown in synchrony. So that's where the features come in, which I think are really important to make module references work.
Yeah, so all these three things, like the namespaces slash some I think versioning, the modularity here that we have with contribution and its complement, and then the feature stuff is always interconnected somehow. It all is related, closely related to each other. So it's while they're independent topics and they can be defined independently, maybe even they strongly relate. So Jim, how do you plan to address the items in your initial email? Do you want to steer the discussion a little bit, like one by one? Not here, I mean, on the list. I mean.
Well, the problem is some of them are rather interrelated. But more or less, yeah. I think going through them one by one is probably going to be relatively useful. 'Cause, 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 'cause I know that Michael and Karsten both have comments about whether or not this should be part of the native language or not. What are the trade-offs for making it? Karsten, is it possible for us to just define basically a prelude to the language and not basically rewrite all of CDDL? Is that something that's potentially useful?
So I would generalize this question is, do we manage to get a clean layering between the module layer and what we have now? And I think that would be useful to have, but I also don't think it's an absolute requirement to have it. So we should evaluate this as we go.
Do you think the same thing is also true for identifying features?
Yes, I think so.
Sorry, what exactly do you mean with identifying features?
Sorry,
You
I'm
don't-
gonna stop the discussion here. It's a bit abrupt, but Mike just told us that he needs to leave, and I would like to
Oh.
get some update on that as well. And then maybe we can go back or see how much time we have left.
Sure.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. Mike, go ahead.
We only need about a minute. I've read through the threads. I can add a sentence, possibly even in the abstract that close the introduction, saying that this represents calendar dates and not a particular point in time. And Jim wrote some text to replace the text that I wrote about decision-making for access control. And I'm fine using something based on Jim's text. So I will publish another draft today, probably within a couple hours. And at that point, if the chairs concur, I think this can go to the IESG. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I think. No, I think calendar. This in the beginning. There's the calendar day and the points in time is everything we need. We don't have to be overly verbose there, and I think that's fine for ISG then.
Okay. And Jim's access control text, I can do something based on that. I think that's all I needed to say.
Mike, what was Jürgen comment or email? Is that, I think I missed that.
The statement about this being a calendar date and not a time addresses what he was talking about. I think we already actually addressed it when we said that time zones and leap seconds are irrelevant, but we can be even more explicit. He was asking for something that this is not. This is for exactly the passport use case, or the driver's license use case, where it says, I was born on March 22nd, 1960. It does not say, you know, at what time I was born or in what time zone.
Okay. Yeah, it's like a plan. You can submit in a version, and then especially people who had comments can take a look at it and see if everything is addressed. And then before sending to IESG, we still need to do the shepherding work. So that might take a little bit.
That's right. Who will the shepherd be?
Yeah. We haven't talked about it. So me and Jim need to decide who takes this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, either of you or Karsten would be fine, but it's up to you, obviously.
If Karsten wants to volunteer, I'm sure that that would be great.
Well, I don't think I should. I'm certainly going to watch this closely, but I'm not sure I should be the shepherd.
But
Okay.
Kerstin, you're not the core chair. What are you doing with all your time now?
Writing drafts,
I'm kidding.
one a
I'm
day.
joking.
Good for you,
Yeah.
Kirsten.
Okay.
Okay, thanks,
Sounds
everybody.
like a plan. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
And we can go back to the CDDL discussion. Maybe you can see in the minutes what the discussion was.
Okay, so
Just before you.
So Hank, what I was thinking is that it might be useful for a module to identify what features it thinks it needs, as
Okay,
well
that
as a
relies
module
on the features again.
as well as a module identifying what features it provides.
Yeah, that is a subtlety added to the things it contributes. So a module will contribute, amongst other things, dedicated features that are clearly highlighted. And that is fine, I think. That should be exposed. But then again, it is a feature notation then. And I assume that is already, if you go through the spec, which you have to do in any case, I assume, if you process it, you know all the features. So I'm not sure if the feature notation itself requires any additional frosting in the CDI specification to highlight that it provides that as contribution. Carsten?
Yeah, I think the the whole thing about features is what can you actually do with them. So in the CDL tool, I was going to put in a feature, excuse me, for being able to select which features are enabled, which means we assume they are present, which features are disabled, which means we assume they are not present. And then there are other features that are not influenced by this command line interface. So they don't, they will lead to warnings or informational messages, but they are not used for switching on or switching off things. But maybe we are overloading the feature mechanism too much. So I think that has to be tried, and maybe we want a different mechanism for switching on and switching off things from the mechanism that says you have to have feature X to use this part of the specification.
So just to be clear, you're talking about features in terms of compiler/language features, not features in terms of we have added this to this module.
It becomes worse. There are three levels. There are features in the language or the compiler. There are features in the specification, and there are features in an implementation. And we need to juggle all three. And it's most likely not possible to do that with one feature.
Can you just give an example of each, just so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, so imagine that we have an update to the reference resolution process. Then we probably want to write in our specification, I only can be compiled by a CDDL implementation that has this feature. So that would be a language or compiler feature. Then there are specification features, which means that a specification evolves and you want to reference or depend on a specification that actually has a certain step in its evolution behind us as opposed to still in front of it. So that caters to the fact that not all systems will have exactly the same set of revisions of a module available. And on the implementation side, you may have features because, well, some implementations can do JSON and CBOR and some can only do JSON. So you have to know which of these features are available in an implementation. So the specification is fully evolved to support both features, but still you may want to select my implementation only does one of them.
Would you consider the JSON/CBOR to be something that would be advertised as a specification feature?
Well, the JSON/CBOR thing can appear on the specification feature level and it can appear on the implementation feature level.
No, I understand
So
that. I wanted to make sure that you thought it also did appear on the specification level.
Okay. And that's actually something that will happen a lot, that we will have a specification that only has a JSON version or only a CBOR version initially, and then we add the other one in as well. And then you need to handle both the fact that parts of the specification may not have been updated yet, and the fact that implementations actually may provide only one of the two.
Yeah, I think that's a good example that binds most of these topics together. That I think is very illustrative.
Yeah, and so far we at the language level, we managed to avoid features, except we have one very, very obvious feature. So we are extending the set of control operators. And the simple fact that a specification uses a particular control operator means that it requires that feature from the compiler. And we probably want to refine that a little bit. So for instance, we are able to say, we have a specification here. And if you actually have a regex implementation of type X, then you can check those strings as well. But that's not necessary to use this specification. So we may actually want to have a slightly more refined feature mechanism at the CDDL level as well.
That also seems to imply that you're tightly tying together the compiler and the validator.
Good point. No, we shouldn't.
So a compiler could have a feature that a validator doesn't have.
Yes. And note that the validator, actually, there are different kinds of processing models. We don't have actually embraced all these processing models. So being able to perform a particular part of the processing model, so for instance, putting in default values, that will be one feature of a CDDL processor, and some will have it and others won't have it.
Okay, how should we proceed? What's the next steps? This is a very interesting discussion. But we should start having maybe a plan on how to move forward.
Well, it should be no surprise that I really love defining terms, because those terms allow us to be specific about the concepts we are using. So it may be useful to just spend some time defining those terms. So of course, we are probably going to discard half of them at some point because they turn out not to be so useful. So once we have done that a little, we might want to identify invariants. So properties of the solution that are going to stay or that are at least desirable. So we understand what the constraints on the design space are. And then at some point, somebody has to just generate a lot of examples for how this could be done in an actual new revision of the specification.
I'm going to have to throw away the response I started writing to you on your terminology document, because terminology email, because all my responsives have now changed after this discussion.
Yeah, we probably should have these discussions. I think that's important.
Okay, so I think I agree that the first thing to do is to set up terminology. People can start thinking about examples that they think would be useful to express, so that we can figure out whether or not we're covering all the bases. So it'd be useful to collect a set of those. Francesca, if you want your 10 minutes, you better start now.
Yes, that's gonna be short. So yeah, it sounds like a good conclusion. And then I guess we can continue at the next interim as well on this and other points on your email, Jim. Does that sound good? Or...
Is our next interim inside of the forbidden zone or not?
I don't know when this forbidden zone is,
That
but
would
it's
be.
the 15th of July.
That's in
Yeah, and it's already scheduled, so we are safe.
It's already scheduled. Yeah.
And it is in
So,
the
I don't know.
submission forbidden zone.
No, it's
Forbidden zone, sorry.
Is week 30 when we are not supposed to have any interims except for the ones that are already scheduled.
Week 30. And that
Week
is...
week 30 is the week before the IETF. And I was trying
Okay.
to get some meetings there, and that's not allowed.
But that's outside of this, right?
Yes.
Because that would be week 29 that we have
Yes.
our interim. So that's good.
Right.
Nothing to worry about. Yeah. So yeah, we have a next interim, and I think we can continue this discussion. That was very, very useful.
Yeah. So what will be the other items?
Well, if Barry is around, we can ask status update. We'll see if we get any comments about the OI document. And hopefully Mike will also have a new submission. So yeah, depends on what happens in 2 weeks. Do you have any other topic that you would like to add to the interim?
I'm juggling so many things at the moment. As you may know, I have 2 buffs that I'm a proponent for at IETF 108.
Yeah, right. So yeah, no, for the IETF 108 scheduling, I just wanted to ask the working group, because it's been scheduled for Monday. Let me open the agenda. Monday session 2. And I think that works for us. We don't have any collisions that we didn't want to have, but I just wanted to check that that's right, because tomorrow is the deadline for requesting a conflict or a change of schedule. That was.
my conflicts between core and TLS.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So then you should probably ping your chairs in core and ask them to move to request to change that.
No, what I need to do is ask them to put TLS on the conflict list.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit too late for that now, but maybe you can fix that. And then the other thing is we will need to submit a draft agenda. Let's see. Which is, yeah, so that's going to be the same day as our interim, the 15th of July. So we discussed this a little bit last interim. We were saying that we would continue this DDL discussion. Now it's approaching. So again, if you have more detail about what agenda items you would like to have, then let us know.
So one thing that might come up, I already mentioned that there is an interest in getting a specification done for JSON path, and that specification would probably be applicable for CBOR as well, at least in some form. So the first meeting on Monday morning is going to be the dispatch working group, and that might actually have an idea on how to handle this standardization, either add it to the ASDF BOF or handle it separately, or maybe do this kind of work in CBOR as well. I don't know. So, but this might come up.
Sorry, Carsten, can you say that again? JSON
path.
path.
So there's something called XPath, which
yes.
can be for XML, and that's a monster. And most people who want to do something with JSON or CBOR need a similar query language. And there's something called JSON pointer, which is nice. And we already tried once to extend that for CBOR, but noticed that this is not as easy as we thought. So we didn't complete that yet. And JSON path is somewhere between the simplicity of JSON pointer and the Turing equivalent complexity of XPath. And we still have to find out where exactly that is.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Carsten. And that was it for me for the IETF 108 scheduling. Any other business, real quick, in 1 minute?
Are you planning to submit starting dates for new interims?
I think we discussed that last as well, and we decided that, if I don't remember wrong, it would be after August.
Right. No, my question
vacation.
was actually a chair issue. We need to actually request that starting point.
Yes. And should we have a discussion on times? Should we just keep the same times?
Keep the times.
Oh, please keep the same times.
Okay. Reaction was quite enthusiastic to keep the same times. Rough consensus, I would say. So yeah, I think we can do that after the IETF week.
So this would restart in September, not in August?
Exactly, yes.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and on that, I think we are done. So talk to you all in 2 weeks. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.